40%.
Our culture,
hang on
our
a second.
history.
Hang on a second. 40% of the contribution in 2 world wars came from Commonwealth countries. There are plenty of people here who've come from families that came from the Commonwealth who fully understand this. He doesn't, and that's part of the problem. Our politicians are disconnected.
His parents came over here and contributed to this economy. Surely he'll understand that.
Too many of our ruling class have no connection with the culture of this country, don't understand what people's problems are, don't understand what their aspirations are, and I'm telling you that I do.
Nigel Farage shuts down a BBC host live, and the clip claims she's left in tears. It's a dispute about the power of language, whether calling someone the other is divisive, and why that matters for trust when leaders write the rules and spend your taxes. And this is where it turns. It's genuinely startling, because the transcript shows him snapping "hang on a second," branding the ruling class cut off in every way, insisting he's British-born, and quoting 40% of the 2 World War contribution coming from Commonwealth countries. He even says, "I'm telling you that I do." If that pressure is real, who gets exposed next? You're about to see a very familiar routine. Establishment telly tries to rattle Nigel Farage, and he refuses to play the part they've written for him. Listen for the numbers, and listen for the moment he calls the whole setup a racket.
That is an enormous cost. It's about 50 billion, but it's also very imaginative. As we all know...
What is that? Sorry, imaginative. What do you mean by that?
But it's not the kind of thinking you get from the others, because they stick with orthodoxy. One of the big problems we've got is we have more and more people, young people too, living off welfare. And it's costing us over £100 billion a year. What we want to do, and there's a trap here, you see. You're on benefits, you go back to work, you work more than 16 hours a week, the tax kicks in, you may as well stay on benefits. There is a terrible trap.
So hence the rationale to raise the tax threshold.
However, since the pandemic, a growing number of young people are saying they've got all sorts of psychological problems, but they're also not incentivised to go to work. We want to get people back to work.
I understand that. So the 50 billion, where will that money come from?
A lot of it will come from the racket that is going on. The government has been creating money, particularly during the pandemic. That money goes into the system, it goes into banks, the banks lodge it with the Bank of England, the Bank of England pay them interest on it. It's a racket. It's a racket. Well, and an increasing number of economists and academics say that alone could save between 35 and 40 billion pounds a year. So I wasn't in charge. If I'd been given responsibility for making Brexit happen, it would have been very different.
But that's an easy get-out. That's a bit like where you are now in Reform, where you're saying, I'm not in charge.
In 2019, right, in the general election, I stood aside in over 300 seats to give Boris Johnson a free run, to get Brexit over the line and to deliver the promises that he made. The reason on migration that Brexit has failed in the eyes of many people is because the Conservative Party haven't delivered. But be in no doubt, we are in charge of these things. Brexit gives us self-government. That doesn't guarantee success, but it does mean we're in charge.
And that we've spoken to the IFS, or taken a look at the IFS, looking at your proposals for changing the Bank of England's function, and that is a very difficult and long process. That is very technical. That would not happen immediately.
Well, no other central bank in the world does this. This is a complete racket with the banks. And interestingly, you know, Paul Tucker, a former Deputy Governor of the Bank of England, fully endorses our plan, as do a growing number of economists. But look, I'm going to launch. And by the way, I won't call it a manifesto, because the word association with manifesto is lie. I'm going to launch our contract on Monday, where I'll lay out all of the costings of our plans. All I can tell you is what we're doing is bold.
Right. Here's the situation in plain, kindergarten simple English. Nigel Farage goes on a BBC programme to sell Reform's pitch, cut the cost of living squeeze, push people from welfare into work, and change how money flows around the system. The BBC host presses him on one basic question: you're talking about 50 billion, where does it come from, and is it real? Farage's answer, according to the transcript, is that welfare is over £100 billion a year, and that the current rules create traps where people can work more than 16 hours and end up worse off. Then he goes even bigger. He says the Bank of England setup is a racket, with banks lodging money and being paid interest, and he claims savings at between 35 and 40 billion could be found there. Why should normal people care? Because every pound wasted, every dodgy incentive, every backroom money loop gets paid for by your taxes, your bills, and your wages. And because when politicians and presenters dance around reality, the public gets told to tighten belts while powerful institutions get protected from scrutiny. Now, the next bit matters because it shows the other trap they try. They push him into you weren't in charge territory, like he's got no right to criticize unless he personally ran the whole country. Pay attention to the wording and how he flips it back onto accountability. So what did that confirm? First, the interview's line is basically, Brexit happened, yet things didn't improve, so why should anyone believe you now? Farage's reply in the transcript is blunt. In 2019, he stood aside in over 300 seats to give Boris Johnson space to get Brexit over the line, and he pins the failure on the Conservatives not delivering, especially on migration. Whatever you think of him, that's a clear political argument. Self-government means you own the results, and the old parties ducked the job. Second, notice the technical's dismissal. He's told his central bank changes are very difficult and would not happen immediately. That's the modern trick. If it sounds complicated, you're meant to shut up and accept the status quo. He doesn't. He repeats racket, names Paul Tucker as a former deputy governor who endorses the plan, and says he'll publish costings in a contract, and he even jokes he won't say a manifesto because the word association is the lie. That's not policy detail, that's a direct attack on the trust gap. And yes, this is where the media class gets prickly, because they can handle a politician who mumbles, they can handle a politician who apologizes, but they struggle with someone who stays calm and talks like an ordinary bloke in a pub. This is broken, it's costing you, and I'm not pretending it's fine. All right, last stretch. I want you to catch the moment they try to paint him as just another think tank politician, and then listen to the specific pledges he drops on inheritance tax and VAT. This is the bit that hits households and small firms.
In charge. If I'd been given responsibility for making Brexit happen, it would have been very different.
But that's an easy get-out. That's a bit like where you are now in reform, where you're saying, I'm not in charge.
In 2019, right, in the general election, I stood aside in over 300 seats to give Boris Johnson a free run, to get Brexit over the line and to deliver the promises that he made. The reason on migration that Brexit has failed in the eyes of many people is because the Conservative Party haven't delivered. But be in no doubt, we are in charge of these things. Brexit gives us self-government. That doesn't guarantee success, but it does mean we're in charge.
That we've spoken to the IFS, or taken a look at the IFS, looking at your proposals for changing the Bank of England's function, and that is a very difficult and long process. That is very technical. That would not happen immediately.
Well, no other central bank in the world does this. This is a complete racket with the banks. And interestingly, you know, Paul Tucker, a former deputy governor of the Bank of England, fully endorses our plan, as do a growing number of economists. But look, I'm going to launch. And by the way, I won't call it a manifesto, because the word association with manifesto is lie. I'm going to launch our contract on Monday, where I'll lay out all of the costings of our plans. All I can tell you is what we're doing is bold and imaginative.
You must recognise this, given what you previously said about how few MPs, even you, think you will get relative to the Parliament. It could be a big jump for you as a party, but relative to the Parliament.
Well, we'll see.
It gives you a freedom to say stuff, doesn't it? That you're not going to have to back this up and say, we couldn't do it.
What I'm saying is this. We have a Labour Party that's won already. The election is over. We all know that. Your viewers all know that. Their thinking on economics, on all of the key issues of our lives, is actually remarkably similar to the Conservative Party. I'm arguing that for democracy to work, governments need to be in a better position to do that than either Ed Davey from the Lib Dems, and Rishi Sunak won't be there. But the Tories are so divided, they don't stand for anything. This is about, I mean, look, we are completely in the grip of big corporate businesses. That's who the politicians listen to. I know that from 20 years in the European Parliament. There are 5.5 million people out there, men and women, running small businesses, acting as sole traders, that frankly are having the most difficult time. I'm on their side and I'll fight for them.
Front page of Reform website as it stands. I know it's not a manifesto at this stage. I'm not quite sure. Do you call it a pledge? I can't remember.
No, a contract.
A contract.
This is what we will campaign
The contract. It says you'll set out your reforms in the first 100 days, is what it says. And you then go to say it's produced with advice from independent economists, think tanks and advisors. And a moment ago you said you're not about conformity. That just sounds like everybody else. Every other political party would say, we talk to independent advisors, we talk to think tanks. You just sound like everyone else.
I've been called many things over the years, but not like everybody else.
Well, no,
absolutely
I'm
not.
quoting from from Reform. That's what you said. It doesn't sound radical. That just sounds like you do the same as other people. You talk to think tanks.
I've just outlined some very radical proposals. Equally, we don't think anybody should pay inheritance tax until the estate is worth £2 million. We want to lift the VAT threshold to help small businesses. I promise you, what's coming on Monday is very, very different.
There it is. The presenter goes straight for the credibility jab. You say you're against conformity, yet your website says you used independent economists and think tanks, just like everybody else. It's meant to make him sound like a brand, not a breaker. His comeback is sharp. He says he's been called many things, but not like everybody else. And then he lists concrete policies: no inheritance tax until the estate is worth £2 million, and lift the VAT threshold to help small businesses. Those are tangible, not vibes. And that's the real fight. It's not about who looks clever on a sofa. It's about whether the country keeps running a system that punishes work, squeezes traders, and treats the public like mugs while institutions hide behind technical fog. If you want change, you don't get it by trusting the same script on repeat. You get it by forcing every person in power to answer the simplest question: who pays, who benefits, and why? Britain's worth more than managed decline, and people are right to demand better.